Wait, Hold Up, What? A podcast from the Women at Eliminate Girl Hate is sponsored by. How many times have you heard the words workplace and culture used together and found yourself rolling your eyes at the thought? Believe me, I'm with you. I'll be honest, as I record this, I just rolled my eyes. That's because the word culture has become homogenized in such a way that they actually had us believing ping pong tables and pizza were symbolic of a good place to work. COVID changed that. Remote work was a success in the eyes of many, and as such, our ideas of what constitutes a good workplace culture have changed, and it boils down to one crucial element: equity. Now, don't you roll your eyes again on me. It's true. The expectation of employees is that they have a work environment and culture that works for them, regardless of who they are. No more cookie cutter swag and Pizza Hut deliveries, mandatory after hours, happy hours, and all of the other things they do to make us feel like we're a family. This is especially true for women. Remote work gave many more hours in the day, the flexibility to feel more productive and present, and a choice in how and what style of work is best for who they are and what they do. This is at the core of what equity means, because the old way was made for one group of people. And this is where Eliminate Girl Hate comes in. We help create safe and equitable spaces for girls and women, and we help the companies that employ them be more profitable in the process. Not rolling your eyes anymore, are you? Check us out at eliminategirlhate.com. Use code WAITHOLDUPWHAT in your contact form for a free consultation call and see how we can help you and your business. Have you ever dreamed of writing a book? I know I have. Or maybe, also like me, you've started a manuscript. Maybe you've started 10 and you've just never finished it, or never let anybody else read it, or never thought you could publish it. Wherever you are in the process, Jim Woods would like to help. Jim's a writer just like you, but he's also a coach who loves helping writers bring their books into the world and make them a reality. If you are like me, sometimes you need that push, a supportive but demanding cohort along the way to put your stories out into the world and keep you on track. Jim Woods is that cohort. Visit jimwoodswrites.com and click the Let's Chat button. Mention our podcast for a free clarity call and get your story out into the world because we need it. We are sponsored by Epiphany Recording Studio. Creativity needs to flow freely if you want to reach that aha moment that we're all looking for. At Epiphany Recording Studio, their goal is to create space that takes full advantage of those moments. From podcast and video production to music creation, you get the support you need to create compelling stories with a competitive sound. Your ideas can flow freely because they partner with you free of judgment, ready to be vulnerable, do the work, and make your projects look and sound their best. So let Epiphany Recording Studio help you reach your artistic vision by visiting them today at epiphanyrecordingstudio.com. Tell them Dawn sent you. And now, wait, hold up, what? Welcome and good morning. I hope you're both doing well today. I would like to ask, I guess, each of you to kind of introduce yourself to the guests that are listening. You don't have to go into super detail unless you want to, but tell us a little bit about yourself. And Natalie, why don't you start?
Sure. My name is Natalie Garagiola. I'm currently in Washington, D.C. I have a marketing background covering sports, television, entertainment, lifestyle brands. I've done, I feel like it all from content creation to experiential activations to paid and 2-year-old and a dog and managing all that chaos.
I love that. I love that. Sounds exciting, and I can't wait to dig into it. Amber, why don't you introduce yourself?
My name is Amber Hockman. I'm located in Southern California. I live here with my husband, my dog, and child also. My background is in fashion. I went to school at the Fashion Institute in LA for product development, and that's evolved into the world of social media, blogging, influencers, content creation. And I oversee a team who does content strategy, influencers, social, and video production.
So, two things. Full disclosure to the listeners. Amber is my younger sister. I use the word younger because if you see any of this video, I think it'll be pretty obvious. So just wanted to call it out. And also that I think your husband will be really excited that you listed him first instead of last in the loved ones in your life. That's not normally Yeah, I feel like the dogs normally get top billing, and Natalie just didn't mention hers at all. So, great. They'll love it.
He's around.
He's there. Thank you both for joining. Also, full disclosure, Natalie and Amber work together in the agency world, which has its own unique set of things that I'm sure are exciting to talk about as well. One of the things I wanted us to kind of discuss, because in separate conversations, we had talked about some of the things we had experienced in the workplace that were really similar. And so I'm going to kind of just start it off right there and right here and there, if you will, and ask you a very blunt question. And that is, what is the craziest thing you have been called in the workplace? Ooh. There were some pursing of the lips for those that are not watching a video, and some real contemplative thinking that's happening on here.
I got called princess a lot.
A lot.
Yeah.
By the same person or by multiple people?
It was by the same group of people. For those that don't know, I come from a sports background. I have family members involved in sports and baseball. So when I was working in baseball as an intern, I felt like it was already such a loaded environment. I was a young woman in my 20s. I was the only woman on the team, on staff. I was an intern. It was really just kind of dipping my toe into that whole professional setting. And just because of my familial association with the sport, there was a lot of, Nepo baby jokes and things like that. So the princess of baseball, gosh, word to princess, just kind of carried on for a while. And, it's so cringy to think back now, but it's like, oh, I want to be a good sport and I have a nickname and I want to show that I belong here. So I rolled with it and I laughed with it. But it is a trigger word for me at this point.
Did it bother you right away? Or did
I
it
think in
take
the moment, I kind of just laughed it off. I was like, oh, haha, because I feel like we're ingrained at such a young age. Don't be difficult. Don't be oversensitive. Don't overreact. And so I was like, oh, it's whatever. It's just a nickname. And then it kept happening. And it kept happening for the season. And then it kept showing up in emails and meetings. And other people started calling me that. And I was like, ooh, this is starting to grate.
And were you a person that was called princess by your father or anybody else?
Never, ever. Absolutely not.
Interesting. Amber, what was the, I guess, worst thing you've ever, or strangest thing you've ever been called?
I don't think it's strange. I think it's unfortunately common, but mine's more around the sweetheart or sweetie. And it bothered me because I was always the youngest. I was always the youngest in school in my grade. And I even at 14 set out to I wanted to have more of a mature persona, but I didn't know how to get there. So when I started going into the working world at 18, I worked at a corporate office for many years. Everybody called me that. And it was like a blessing and a curse. It was great to think that they're sentimental and nice towards you, but then same as Natalie, it's I don't have the demeanor to justify why you need to call me something different, or the stance of why I could defend that I'm a mature individual with a job who should be respected for that. So it bothered me all the time, but I had to use it for my advantage. Unfortunately, with the disadvantage, but had to use it for my advantage to try and get where I wanted to go so that people would respect me at a certain point and hopefully drop the name.
Did it bother you right away that, the first time you heard it, you were like, oh.
Yeah, every time.
Okay.
Also would never correct somebody though. I didn't know how to at that time. Nobody's called me. It's been years since somebody called me that now, unless it was someone's grandparent, but yeah.
So a lot of people that might not have bothered them, especially then, we're talking, 15, 20 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
We're in there? Okay. So why do you think it bothered you from the start?
It was typically never females who called me that. It was typically males. They were all older than me by probably at least 10 years. And so I respected their stature and the respect they got in their position. And I didn't feel like they got treated that way. So how was I supposed to get that if I didn't have an equal playing field? So it instantly bothered me. I didn't see anybody calling them terms of any sort of term of endearment. They weren't like, oh, hey, buddy. No, they called them by their name, their job title, their reference. It was a mature, respectful way. So I wasn't sure at that age, again, I was always the youngest person, and I wanted to prove my value and that I could be young and smart, or I could be young and successful. And there was such a big emphasis I put on myself for that. So anytime somebody did it, it was like they were knocking me one step further backwards. And I was like, how do I overcome this? And I didn't know how to. So it made it like more gross every time they said it.
And do you think that in the process of doing that, did it change? And this could be for both of you. There is different ways in which gendered language, which is what we're talking about, technically, that is gendered language is used, right? Culturally, there are different mores and things that happen that may excuse a behavior. So, for example, someone from the South, right? They use sweetie and honey a lot, and that's part of their culture, or they might describe it as part of their culture. Some older people, especially in lots of, I don't want to say marginalized communities, but really close knit communities on the East Coast, there's a lot of that, right? Where it might be a Jewish community where the rabbi or the older people, that's just how they refer to young women. There's no maybe intentional bias being used in that. Did you find yourself at that age excusing people that might have come from a community or a culture where that was normal, but being upset in other situations? Or did it always bother you regardless of where it came from?
I did excuse it for a few people, and they were from the Midwest and the South. And I don't know if I associated their accent with the demeanor, but like it seemed more genuine that they were relating to me as a person, but they weren't referring to me as like a business counterpart. So I think in like the business setting, it was okay, I guess. It still bothered me, but I was like, I think that's how they talk is in my head. Like military, they say, sir, ma'am, a lot more than like somebody who's not associated with that. So I kind of gave the association to their region of where they lived, and their accent kind of helped me assume that that was why they were doing it. But otherwise, I didn't grow up where people call people that. So our dad didn't call us sweetie, or not that I didn't call me sweetie.
For you, were there different people where it was like, that's fine?
With princess, no. But I definitely got my fair share of sweeties and hun and darlings and sweetheart. And yeah, I think similar to Amber, like the context really is what made or break it. Again, Amber said it perfectly. Like I felt like, oh, they're just addressing me like as a human being, like as Natalie. This is just their way of communicating versus like an older white man who probably was like uncomfortable talking to a young woman in the workplace, already afraid he was going to say the wrong thing. So he's trying to overcompensate by saying, oh, sweetheart, can you just come do this? Not even realizing.
Do you think that that is changed now? And what I mean by that is now that you have more tenure, more professional experience, do you think it would bother you regardless of where it came from now?
I think it depends. My role is a VP currently. And so I think that automatically, unfortunately, also comes with the stature of like how somebody perceives my understanding for something. So I think I get approached with like, I don't know if I've been called that again, unless it was a lot older man. I don't think I've been called that in years. So I don't know. I think it would probably depend on the context again. If they were asking me to do a task on their behalf, it would probably bother me. If they were saying, oh, sweetheart, like, welcome to this, whatever, it might not bother me as much, but I think I can justify now, or I have the ability to articulate and redirect if they did call me that in a demeaning way. And I feel confident in that now.
So, there's probably, I was about to say, there's probably a lot of men listening, and that's probably not actually true. But let's say that there were, and women, right? But there's probably a lot of people in management or leadership positions that are listening. And I think what makes subject matters like this so difficult for so many is that nuance that we're talking about. Like, why is it okay for one person versus another one? And that nuance is difficult for them and for us as the recipient of gendered language to figure out, when should it bother me? When should it not? Does it really bother me? Does it not? I have been called sweetie and honey. And I used to get, to be honest, I still get this. I get kiddo a lot. I am 47 years old. look 47 years old. So anytime someone does call me kiddo, it is very much one of those stop in your track moments. Like, wait, what? What just happened? Right. But it happens a lot. And it is interesting because that is something that has always bothered me. And it bothers me when people call me hun or sweetie. When I was younger, it would bother me if younger people did it, but not older people. I just thought it was a cultural thing in our society where that was what happened. But the older I got, the more I started to see it as a way to be in my lane, if you will. And so I wonder if, as you grew in your career, do you remember the first time that you said, wait a minute, I would prefer it if you did not call me that? Have you ever done it?
Never at work. Never.
Never at work. So even today, all these years later, it's something that bothers you, it irks you. Why not say something?
I think again, I've done it in personal relationships. I've had personal relationships where the term like, oh sweetie, it's and it comes across very condescending. And I've definitely advocated for myself then. But at work, I think it's still just that like very primal fear of like, I don't want to seem difficult. I don't want to seem abrasive. This instinct to just be an accommodating beta that I felt like was very, very drilled into me. Like, be quiet, keep your head down, do good work, and people will notice and they'll get rewarded for it versus like advocating for yourself and standing up for yourself. And like, it's okay to be difficult. It's okay to point out something that is making it a less than desirable workplace situation for you. I never felt empowered to do that. And I was never encouraged to do that as a young child.
Let's put some more words on that. As a child, in how you were raised, what do you think was the facilitator of that? So, for example, if you weren't empowered to do that, was there language around, hey, as a girl, you should do this, or worry about this, don't do this? Like, were there things like that in your upbringing?
Oh yes, be polite, be poised, graceful. Those were big words that we were told that were a very big part of our conversation. Be polite, don't be disruptive. Physical appearance was a big thing in our house. So if you look poised and graceful and put together, people will notice and they will treat you the right way.
Were you because of what you said earlier, family being in sports, were you a public facing family?
A little bit. There's definitely a little bit of that. So I have this vivid memory so we went to a lot of baseball games. As a family, I started going when I was maybe 5. And in my mind, I was like, oh, it's a baseball game. Like it's a sports game. I want to wear like comfy clothes, my clothes that I get to wear like when I go play. So I wanted to wear, like my sneakers and my shorts and like a fun t-shirt. And my mom would try to stuff me into those opaque, thick white tights and like a dress and like the patent leather shoes. And I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, and my child's brain was like, no, like we're going to a baseball field, Mom, it's dirty. Like I'm gonna get dirty. I can't wear these dresses and these tights and these clothes. And I get to see other kids at the stadium and they're wearing jeans and t-shirts. Why can't I? And it was just like every night we had to go to a game. It was this huge battle of like trying to stuff Natalie into her dress. Because my mom had this, I think, very clear idea of like, we need to be this image, this this united image representing the family and the organization.
Which makes sense.
Was it different for your brother?
He got to wear, yeah, it was different. He still had to dress nice. He had to wear like a polo and khakis, but he got to go to all these places in the stadium with my dad. He got to go sit with my dad and do all these things that the rest of us girls didn't get to do. We weren't allowed to be really, like, I remember it's a sports game. You're allowed to like cheer and make noise. And like, it's a very rowdy environment. And we had to sit very quietly. Like we couldn't boo. We couldn't be super rambunctious. We had to like clap very polite. Like if you go to a game with me now, it looks like I'm watching golf because I'm very like subdued. Because that's how it was growing up. Because we had to kind of present this like, again, like very reserved image. And I think that stuck with me. Like,
of course.
Every job interview, every college interview, it was again like poised, put together, like controlled.
And what did you think would happen if you stepped outside of those parameters?
My mom would get mad at me and do the silent, slow molasses. I am so disappointed in you. Or, oh my God, just yell at me. It'll be over faster.
How do you think that shaped the way you approach being a woman and what that means for you? But I also know that, Amber, you have brothers as well. And in some ways, that similarity between what happened for the boys or what was expected for the boys was different for the girls. So you relate to Natalie a little bit, but was what was expected something different besides poise and things like that?
I wasn't expected a level of presentation necessarily for myself as a girl. I think I tested limits because I was told, you're a girl, boys are different, girls are different. So I was told all of these things. So I would push things to prove and see what I could do. I would wear crop tops and teeny little shorts because I wanted to just be, I wanted the feminine sexual side of myself, not to be sexual, but I wanted to be the hold on to the things that, like, if I'm a girl and I'm different, then I get to be a girl. And these are the things that girls have. And so, like, I think that was different for me. And maybe then it wasn't as intentional in that sense, but I think I grasped onto any teeny little thing that as a female, I could say, like, okay, fine, I am this. So I'm going to lean into it. I took on one of our brothers played traditional sports, every traditional sport you could imagine. And I leaned into the traditional female role. You're a cheerleader in high school. And that was my role. But I was like, I'm going to lean in hard then, like the cheerleader lifestyle and all of that. So, like, I leaned into the female roles, I think, in opposition of not getting what I perceived to be fair because I was a girl or whatnot. It wasn't necessarily, I wasn't told how to present myself, but I was told things were different because simply based on a gender.
So Amber and I are 10 or 11 years apart, somewhere in there. And how we were raised was pretty significantly different. And we don't actually talk about it a lot, but it's interesting in hearing how you took that and ran with it versus how I took it and ran with it. Because I think I leaned into masculine qualities, and I certainly did not show my body in any way, shape, or form. I continually was ashamed of my body, and the femininity around my body, right? That I was somehow asking for trouble by just physically being in that body. And so I was a turtleneck girl. Like you wouldn't believe, when I was very young, I would wear turtlenecks under t-shirts because I was super cool and trendy. I also, full disclosure, had a lot of skin issues and things of that matter. So my upbringing was very much about covering up. And it wasn't just covering up my body or my skin, it was covering up who I was, because I innately thought there was something wrong with being a girl or being a woman. I did not have very many, if at all, female friends until much well into my 20s. I knew girls and I hung around them, but I certainly was much more involved with the guys that were in our circle. And I took on aesthetics that were more masculine in nature, or personality traits that were more masculine in nature. So it's very interesting to see how, this is probably the wrong word, but the rebelliousness of us against that tide showcased itself in different ways. And being an older sister, when the younger sisters came up and they were so much more, from my perspective, comfortable in their femininity, I didn't know it was a rebellious act at the time. I just saw them, you and my other sister, expressing themselves in a different way from me. And I was like, wait, that's allowed? I really didn't know that was allowed. One of the great things about Amber is she, at a very young age, was, she pushed back a lot. She was like, I don't think so. That's not going to happen. Right. Yes, you are still 100% that way, but it is actually much different as an adult. And as a kid, it was, nobody was going to tell you who you were, what you were going to do, or why you were going to do it. But having seen you in professional situations, you've definitely had less resolve in pushing back against those things professionally than you did in your personal life. Do you think there was something that differentiated those for you in your mind?
I think it has more to do with ageism, probably, and some of the aspect of being a female. But I think when I was younger, I think I thought it was my superpower that I was going to lean into the Britney Spears, Spice Girls era of life, like lean into it. But I was like the most like not that. And so I think I thought it was like, I'm going to outsmart it. I'm going to be the smart person who appeal or who puts on the presentation like these females should, but I'm smarter than them, or I'm smarter and I'm going to outsmart myself. I didn't know how to like put it together. So I think in a professional setting, when everyone demeaned me based on my age or my gender or these like terms of endearment, I was like, I don't know what to do with that. And I'm smarter than that. I need to get past and prove that I'm smarter so I can like get past that. So I think maybe that was probably some of my hesitation, or I embarrassingly leaned into like the dumb blonde aspect of like, if I play dumb, but I'm really smart, I can eventually work my way around this. So lean into like, I'll do that task for you, but I'm going to do that task in 14 others and prove to you that I'm better than what you gave me to do. And so I think I used it again. I had to belittle myself in the process to like get around them. And then they're like, oh, and then somebody would be impressed with me. I'm like, great. Now I've made one hurdle. Here's 14 more about to come at me. So I think I just used it, and it's like embarrassing to think of now because you're like, why would you do that? Like, you know, so much more now. You like think, why would you do that? But in my head, then it like worked. I was like, fine, treat me like I'm dumb and young and a female and incompetent to be able to do this because you're a man who's smarter than me. And then eventually I would do better or grow or proceed or whatnot in life.
So you just said it's kind of embarrassing now. And there's some grace that's needed there, right? Everybody quotes the Maya Angelou, when you know better, you do better. But it's also about finding what works for you. And historically, a lot of women had to find a way to fit into the square peg. So however you shape shifted to do that so that you could be successful and get the things that you wanted, you did. And the way in which the world worked is it wasn't about coming in and breaking the box. It was most certainly culturally about fitting into the box. And we're in this world now where we're being told maybe hammer the box a little, maybe dent it, stretch it, do those things. I don't know if we're fully allowed to break the box. If you break the box, it comes at high personal cost. And even what you did in that instance, that also has a high cost. Because if you're shape shifting to fit into someone else's narrative that works for you, there is something subconsciously that has to do to you, right? Emotionally, mentally, all of those things spiritually. So as you're older and you have the benefit of time and experience and maybe a little bit of regret, how do you impart that wisdom on someone else who might find themselves in the situation now?
great question. For me, I think it's in the aspect of like viewing everybody as an individual, female or male, it really doesn't matter to me. But I think that each person, we have so many diverse backgrounds and experiences, and those are only like the mix of all of those between like a group of people at work or your friend group or whatever only makes your work stronger. So, or the output stronger. So I think it's really important to get to know people, to make everything on a personal level. And I know sometimes at work that's hard, but even listening in a meeting to a client and you hear that they love their dog or their dog walked in, and you break the barrier to like understand that they're a human and what's your dog's name? What kind of dog it is? So like figure out how to relate to people that gives them the understanding of like, maybe you say something wrong, you mispronounce their name, somebody says sweetheart to them. Like give yourself like the grace to learn and adapt, but you also have to be receptive to other people. So I think it's really important to understand people and then empower them to be themselves and maybe give them different ways to like shape on their way there. Like that's a great way, or that's a great point of view. An articulation where somebody might respect it is if you give them XYZ, fill in the blank. So I think it's again, allowing people the space to be themselves, but also trying, I oversee a team, but I've overseen other people as well, like giving them the opportunity to, again, be themselves and then learn what works for them and what they're like way of empowerment or their like superpower is, so that everybody can be visualized as the person they want to be and the person they are without having to put on a front to fill a hole.
I would ask this of both of you. What would it take for you now to tell somebody what you are thinking in that setting? So you're in a meeting and a client calls you sweetie or princess or honey. What would it take for you to communicate that makes you uncomfortable or it's inappropriate to somebody now? Client, fellow colleague, boss, and does it matter by who they are?
I think for me, a client would be a whole nother beast because that is a client. We are in a service-based industry. That is a whole another more tenuous relationship. I think, going back to the easier part of that question, if it was a coworker or a boss, I think I would try to do right by 22-year-old Natalie, who like was so eager and so excited to try to like show up and like be a part of this industry that she'd, loved for so long and got so quickly boxed into one area, and it was so frustrating. So I'd want to do right by her. Think back her in her horrible J. Crew suit that didn't fit, And I think for a client, I think back a lot, now that I'm a mom, every day I try to, think I want to do stuff that will make my son proud of me, even if he's 2.5 and I make him proud by turning on the TV for Paw Patrol. But, I want my son to to grow up in an environment where women are powerful and can stand up for themselves. So even if it is, uncomfortable, and I'm sure I would ask Amber to proofread my email 105 times before I sent it to a client, try to find the strength to stand up for myself, even in a client situation.
So I have to ask this. I do not personally have children, but oftentimes when you are speaking with women and you ask a question like this, they do refer to their children and wanting a better world for their children than they had for themselves. At this stage of your life, and I'm not asking how old you are for a reason, but why not make you proud?
Very, very good question. I think especially right now, it's like my son's 2.5. So I feel like I'm still so much in the like survival stage and I'm pouring everything I have into this bright little supernova of a boy because I just want him to be his brightest self because that makes me feel like my brightest self. But you're right. You're absolutely right. Like I'm still a person. I'm a person outside of being a mom. Like I matter and I should make myself proud too. And I think that's something that I myself, and I know I have other mom friends who it's a daily battle trying to remember ourselves, even as something as simple as like, hey, you should eat breakfast today. That isn't a handful of cereal on the way out the door.
Well, and it's so overused, the whole oxygen mask, your own before your child, and right, it's so overused. But I've been through a lot of therapy, just full disclosure. And I heard one time something said in therapy that was about kids. And we often hear kids referred to as resilient and things like that, which is true and not true. We hold a lot of our pain from our childhood, and that influences who we are as adults. But what this person had said to me is that kids see everything, right? And even when you think that they don't see, they see it. And sometimes that holds in their body until 20 years later and it comes out in something. And we've probably all had that moment as well. But oftentimes people use that to say kids see the bad. But I really saw that very differently and thought about my own childhood and my siblings and all of these things. And kids see the good too. And I think what is often missed, at least from the outside of motherhood, is that when a woman uh, lives in her purpose, whatever that is, right? Because there's all sorts of controversy about whether or not we should do that or whatever. I'm not here to argue that, right? But when they live in a way that is fulfilling to them and they are filled outside of people, whether that be children, husbands, family, whatever it is, kids see that too. They see the spark, they see the light in the eye, they see somebody doing something they love. And they take all of that and say, wow, I'm worthy of that too. And I think sometimes that's missed in the conversation, especially around motherhood, because it's like, no, I'm so busy doing all of these other things so that they can be great. And it's like, you're already the example of great that they need to see, and reminding ourselves of that moment and saying, okay, this happened to me at work. I was just called princess in a work setting. I deserve better than that. And your kid will see that. The people in your life will see that. The people that work for you will see that and say, wow, if she feels that way, I can feel that way. That doesn't mean it's easy to do. Um, when you are the example or the person that people are looking to, that's often also a really heavy burden to bear, whether it's a child, an employee, a younger sibling, or somebody you're taking care of or tasked with taking care of. So I don't know that there's a question in there, but it's more of that reminder of how do we make ourselves proud? And for some people, that is speaking up in those settings. For other people, that's not their journey. And there's a myriad of reasons for that. For some people, it might be, man, I wish I could have spoken up in that. So, how do I correct for that behind the scenes? How do I reach out to someone and get feedback of how I could have responded, or how can I respond in a way that makes sense? I think that's important for us to leverage for ourselves, because it's easy to cheer on other people doing it and then still not feel like, wait, gosh, or to get down on yourself because you didn't do it. Like, oh, if I would have just, we've all had that, right? I so love a person who can come up with a zinger or a retort in the moment, and it's funny and self effacing, and also like, hey, enough, right? All those people are so amazing. I just want to like say, can you teach me? I'll pay $100 an hour. I don't have $100 an hour, but I'll do it. Can you teach me how to do that? So would these conversations be better started at home? So Natalie, for you, for example, when you talked about your mother and this idea of what for her was the vision of a family in this environment and so forth, do you and she have conversations like this? Or have you ever? Never.
No.
And would you?
Today,
Yeah.
such a defeatist attitude, but honestly, probably not. My mom is older. She's very set in her ways. And the way I kind of view it is something that I'm, working on, is learning to accept my mother for the person that she is and make the most of the time we have, instead of constantly wishing she were someone else and trying to change that. Now, obviously, if something really
Amen.
problematic came up, I would address it. But like at this point, she's 74. She lives far away from me. You know, she's a first time grandmother with me. So really just trying to focus on those positive things that we do have. Because at this point, like rehashing how it made me feel frustrated that I had to wear some gaudy floral dress to a baseball game. It's just going to make her feel bad.
Yeah.
And it's not going to do anything. So
I think we oftentimes think that conversations like that have to be accusatory or rehashing of something.
mhm.
Would you ever have a conversation with your mother to ask her what it felt like growing up as a girl for her, and what she felt were her restrictions or her rules or her boundaries that were set without her permission?
Oh, definitely. I think, we've really reconnect. I'm the only one out of my siblings to have children. So we've had this whole other amazing like avenue within our relationship open up about motherhood. And, she didn't work. So she's really curious about what it's like to be a working parent and all of that. So yeah, I definitely think that's something that we could have. Because I know she grew up in a very traditional household. I feel like even more so than mine. So, and she was very, just despite, the dresses at the baseball games, she wanted to be a scientist. She had all these big plans. I'm sure she felt the societal restrictions close in.
Yeah, it's funny. I have two comments I want to make about that. One is about one of our grandfathers, very lovely man who has since passed, but very much somebody who saw the world different than I did. and it would upset me. I'm a pretty emotional person, and that's just how I process, right? And especially with regards to women and what women did. He would make comments, and out of respect for him, I might not fully express what some of them were, but he would say things that would, even though they weren't necessarily about me, they really hurt me because it hurt me to know that someone felt that way. And I would comment and I would say, Grandpa, that is not appropriate. That is not fair. Why would you think that? And I oftentimes got feedback from other family members. He's just old. I just let it slide. I don't love it, but let it slide. And that never really sat right with me because if people don't learn, if they don't see another side, if they're not being educated in respectful ways, then that thinking never changes. And we have this weird skewed perception that old dogs can't learn new tricks. And I just vehemently disagree with that. I think that dialogue and conversation and storytelling is what opens up people's minds and opens up their hearts and lends to change. And you don't have to be rude about it. You don't have to be all of these things, but you find out things in talking to them that is their own trauma and their own reasons why they have fallen into this way of thinking and this perception. And then one day I was speaking in Bend, Oregon about women in modern society and the changes that have happened culturally to open up worlds for women. And I talk a lot about Title IX when I speak. And this woman came up to me and she was in her mid 60s. Her name was Claudia. She was amazing. She starts to tell me how she is a runner and she didn't start running until she was 62 years old. And she started running half marathons and 5Ks and full marathons. And she said that when she was a child, Title IX didn't exist. And therefore, she did not have the opportunity to participate in sports and things that she really wanted. She was a tomboy, all of these things, and that she really missed out on that. But she had told herself because of kids and husbands and society that that would never be a part of her life. And then in her 60s, in a chance meeting with somebody who said, "Why don't you come run with me?"
Mhm.
And it sounds like such a simple story, but that moment for her literally changed her life. She joined running clubs. All of her friends were part of runs. She went on trips to do running. And ultimately, it had nothing to do with the actual part of running. It was the opening up and the permission that was given to her to change and to do something different. And so I think storytelling and dialogue is what really creates that for people. And so I'm with you. I've been through therapy. I'm not trying to change a parent, a sibling, a grandparent, a coworker. It's impossible. It is fleeting. It will just bum me out for life. But I do want to have the conversations and I do want to understand why people come to the thinking that they do. Because for me, I get very overwhelmed in a misunderstanding. It flusters me, it gets me upset. But if you explain to me why something is, I am instantly opened up into a world of acceptance. And I think so many people are like that, but don't know that. It's like, okay, you haven't called me back in 3 weeks and I'm repeatedly calling you. I am so angry at you. But then you call me and tell me, well, this last 3 weeks have been crazy and we've done this and we've done this. And now I have more grace because I can put myself in your position and things like that. So I just think that idea of sparking conversations, not about getting an apology or not about getting, let's change the past. It's more about coming to terms with understanding so that both sides could find a new way. It's not going to be the way you always dreamed. You'll probably be called princess again.
Oh God.
Um, You'll probably be called sweetie again, right? In a context in which you don't like. But if those conversations don't happen in productive ways, you most certainly will. And it continues to fester, right? And you become angry. So in that vein, as we look at these types of conversations and the fact that there's so much nuance, if I am a person who just doesn't understand why calling you princess or sweetie or kiddo is so infuriating. And then they hear us talk and say, well, for some people, it doesn't bother me. And for some people, I let it go. That could be very confusing on the other end. And then it seems it's not really an issue for us. It's a issue we choose to have if we don't like somebody. So what would you want somebody to know about why this doesn't work for you or why this is limiting? Then maybe they don't understand.
For me, the barrier would be more articulating that either wasn't okay or that I wanted to be referred to as something different. But as you were talking, I was thinking of ways I would say that in a like client or business setting. I think the most important thing for me, they're using a belittling behavior or phrase that regardless of if they meant it that way or if the intent was that, I don't want to treat them the same way they treated me. So I was trying to think of an articulation of like how I could say it in my own experience of like, to redirect it, not to put them down. Because again, they may have no idea this might be normal language for them, or they may be doing it with intent. So I was thinking some way that I might say that might be in the vein of, you can just refer to me by Amber and tell them how they can do something for me, which is, and to me, the word can is like, not will you? It's not a question. Like the opportunity is for you to refer me, and this is how you can do it. It's by using my name. If they ask a question like, I'm sorry, what did I say? Maybe they don't know. That just slipped out of their mouth. So then that's the opportunity, I think, where like what you're asking is like, what would I want to tell them? I think just you can refer me to my name. I don't know necessarily, I wouldn't want to put them down. But I also think if you're talking about referring to like your family, starting at home, going back to that, I think that would actually be harder than it would a third party because you have so many contexts and nuances to like why they do this or defense mechanisms like, oh, well, they're just like that. Because if it's a stranger, it's a little easier to break a barrier and like test out that language than it is to test it out with somebody who's going to be like, I've called you this for 15 years. What are you talking about? Like, why are you annoyed? So like, I think for me, it would be more giving them the opportunity of how they can relate and speak with me. And then if they really didn't understand, I think at that point, for me, it's a little easier to go into details. I know you said it flusters you, Dawn, when it's like in that uncomfortable spot. I think I'm kind of the opposite there. Like I could go into 14 different things and give you 14 different reasons based on the context of how it could be belittling. It could be based on age or gender or the way that you're asking me to assist you on something that's your responsibility. I don't know what it was, but I think to me, that part's the easiest part. The harder part is breaking the barrier and just like opening my mouth and saying, I think I would let it beat me down a few times before I did it. And then referring to me as sweetheart in like a meeting. And I even for a client now, I think I'd be able to say like, you can just refer to me as Amber. And then hopefully we move on and they're left sitting there and being like, what did I just do? But that's on them too.
Sure.
Figure it out.
Sure. That makes sense. Do you ever think that someone has intentionally used this language to put you in your place?
Yes. Yep. I think that's a phrase used, unfortunately, for younger professionals in that vein. If we're talking about a work setting, I think it's meant to validate their authority by not referring to them as their name, or the girls over there, or the boys over there, or the kids at that table, or that group over there, or the interns. They don't refer to an intern as their name. You refer to them as your intern because I'm not saying that's appropriate. I'm saying that's what happens because it's a power play of authority. And I think there's also a gender power play of authority too that happens to play in there. If there's a female at a similar title, they could use that instead of my assistant. Or they could say, I think it's a validation, self-validation thing. And I don't know what for each person, I'm sure it's different. But I think that, unfortunately, females and younger people probably get hit more with that than males or older people.
I think it's so interesting, though, that human nature, or by its very kind of core, is about, what's the right word? It's like about ranking people, right? In order for us to feel confident in our position, then we've got to be able to have somebody below us. It's such a weird construct and concept of things and how we utilize them to treat other people. Do you think that going through those experiences has changed the way in which you manage people of both genders? And if so, how?
Yeah, because I think I tell people part of my favorite thing about where I work is that I think everybody's very smart at what they do and everybody deserves an equal seat at the table and an opportunity to have a voice. So like I try really hard to do that. I think I try and relate that into my personal life with my kid and why they have a valid opinion versus mine as the adult in the situation, that naturally someone with more experience or a higher position or title or responsibility is going to take a heavier weight. But I think that I try really hard. I mess up. I'm sure I mess up all the time, but I try and make sure that people feel like they are validated and they have the opportunity and it's not based on their role at the company or whatnot. And so I try and make sure everyone else on the team feels like that, as well as hopefully they're feeling that naturally without me having to say it. But I try really hard.
Natalie, I actually didn't ask if you managed people or have. So if it's not relevant, please let me know. But if it is, how has it impacted you in the way you manage people?
Actually, Amber does a really great job of what she said about treating each person like an individual, and their unique experience is what makes them so great at what they do. So I've tried to have that more of an open mind as I approach working with others. Like, you're a human being, you have stuff going on, you have your own unique experience that's going to make your perspective and your POV all that more valuable. And I think, I haven't really had the opportunity to manage a lot of people, but when I have worked with people a little bit below me, it's sort of, I just want to make sure that they know it's okay for them to advocate for themselves and try to create those spaces and those environments where they can speak up for themselves. And if they don't feel like they can, try to be that ally. Then, like, do you need me to help? How can I help support you? How can I help you lift you up so that you do feel safe and empowered to do so?
And what do you think you need to advocate for yourself in the workplace?
It's a great question. I don't know. Amber's been a really great boss and mentor, and she's always just done such a good job, like giving me permission to do so, like saying you are allowed to make noise. You are allowed to speak up and raise your hand and say something, and it's not a bad thing. Like, I think so many of us, we just don't even give ourselves permission, whether it's in work or in our personal lives, to make noise.
And take up space.
Take up space. I mean, I think about this. This is my Roman Empire, is this opening scene from that Netflix show, The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, which I don't know if you've seen. It's like such a deep cut. But John Hamm, who plays the like cult leader who kidnaps the women, and I know he says it to be funny, but it has stuck with me. So it's like a barb in my heart. He says, "It is amazing what women will do out of fear of coming across as rude." And I think about that every day, how we make ourselves smaller and less shiny and less noticeable. And like, we will fold ourselves into teeny, teeny, tiny little origami boxes because we don't want to come across as like too big or too loud or too disruptive. And like,
Why do you think? I mean, look, we could go in deep cuts about why that is, but there's only so much time in the world. But why do you think that prevails today?
well, I think it honestly, a huge part of it goes back to the very beginning of this conversation with like the language in the workplace. Like, women get called, I feel like they're small terms, sweetie, honey, darling. Men get called champ, killer, my guy. They get these empowering nicknames, and women get these nicknames that immediately sideline us.
Yeah.
Somebody
Yeah.
referred to me as killer, I think I'd be like, I should probably quit. I think I'm attacking them. Not killer in a positive way. It's killer immediately the opposite version of that. Like any of those terms you did, I'd be like, oh no, they think I
Rock star, all these things. Like,
Yeah. 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 A bulldog.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I'm a person from the beginning of time, I'm going to imagine, that has just really loved language and words and been attracted to it. Like, I was a kid with words all over my room and posters, and I'm staring at about 500 words across from me on my bulletin board right now. I just really, really love it. And one of the things that has really challenged me over the last few years of work is choosing the right terminology that, number one, is inclusive, but also that is not damaging in a way. So I honestly think it's because of the birth of my nephews. I have three of them. And I guess I didn't realize how aggressive the language is around boys versus girls. And my big thing has always been my least favorite word. I'm I'm afraid people on this podcast are going to hear this sentence so many times they're going to get annoyed. But my least favorite word in the English dictionary, besides the word moist, which we can all agree should just be thrown out the window, right, is the word TOO, because it's a word that is used most of the time with women. You're too aggressive, you're too sensitive, you're too emotional, you're too sexual, you're too prude. Everything has this caveat to it about being too much, which goes to that taking up space and that origami box. But language around men is aggressive in a different way, right? We all work in some component of marketing. Have you ever realized how violent the language is that we use in marketing? We're going to blow shit up. We're going to attack this. We're going to be on target. Let's shoot for this date, right? And I could keep going on the language that we use. And it's just been part of our lexicon and moving on. And because it is so subconscious, we don't even think about the way that that impacts how we look at the world. And when my nephews came along, I was like, wow, we are really letting boys just continue to be taught a certain way. Every single TV show for quote unquote boys, which is a whole other subject about gendered things in child raising, but is about shooting. It's superheroes. It's even the Legos, right? It's about who wins and who fights the bad guys. And there's army and there's squirt guns and there's all of these things that are so aggressive, and they're 2 years old or 3 years old. And then we wonder why they grow into men who want to destroy, kill, shoot, right? Video games and all the television shows we watch. I have so many friends and family members with children that are dead set against any sort of sexual content, even in its smallest form. And yet anything violent, they're watching from such an early age. And that alone feeds into these things. And yet girls should be watching My Little Pony. And I was about to use some really old references. I do not yet know young girls' cartoons right now, or if there is even such a thing that exists. I was going to say Strawberry Shortcake and Raggedy Ann, which probably most listeners don't know what that is. But thank you for this. I really loved the hand on the heart at those references. I really loved a good scratch and sniff Strawberry Shortcake doll when I was a kid. And my very first record player was a Strawberry Shortcake record player with an album that was Strawberry Shortcake sings Kool and the Gang's greatest hits. So I don't know what those girl references are, right? I have three nephews, but it is definitely interesting to hear how they talk. Uh, I was with one of them recently and we were playing Legos, and he plays a little bit more subdued than one of the other ones who is a little bit more fight oriented. And we're using voices, and he has me be Spider-Man, and I start talking as Spider-Man, and I'm like, oh, I'm Spider-Man. And this is the official Spider-Man voice, in case you were wondering. I'm Spider-Man, and I'm going to do this. And he stops me, puts his hand on the toy, and says, Auntie, that is not the voice I want you to use. I would like you to use a girl voice. And in that moment, I had to think about that before I just immediately went into a high pitched voice. And so I stopped and I said, oh, I'm sorry. First of all, I thought I was Spider-Man, and I thought Spider-Man had a deep voice. But second of all, what is a girl voice? What does that even mean? And he proceeded to go, I'd like you to talk right up here. I think that would be better for this character. And I was like, first of all, you're 5 years old. What do you know about character development? This is crazy. But also it was like such a thing for a kid who doesn't typically see or seem to notice those types of things, he had a very clear identification of what that would look like and what that is. And again, I think it is from the languages that we use and the offhanded things that we put into the lexicon of what we're talking about that just becomes part of it. And so of course we call women sweetie and princess and honey. It's a compliment. Don't you want to be a princess? Personally, I do not. Uh, that life seems very difficult. The crowns seem like they would hurt your head. The garments seem very binding. They're oftentimes in a very big castle waiting for someone to kiss them. It just seems very not exciting in the world that we're in. And yet we've idealized it somehow in some way as being the things that we should want. So as we close out, you both have young boys. What do you hope that they want out of life and demand out of life?
That was the most loaded question of the whole thing.
Well, okay, let's condense it. What do you hope they tell others about how their mother raised?
To treat everyone with respect, and kindness. And everybody is different, and that is a beautiful thing to be celebrated and to be shared.
Mine's very similar to that. It's around, I hope that he sees how I treat people, and I hope that he sees that's accepting and open, and that each person's okay to be them how they are, and that he treats people that way. And he sees, I hope I'm doing a good job portraying that for him, but I hope that he gives people the opportunity to be them,
Yeah.
and in turn gets the opportunity to be him, which is whatever he wants to be.
And so I said that was the last question, but it made me want to ask you both something else. What do you hope he tells his future partner about you? Like, if he were to use a sentence to describe his mother, how would you hope he describes you?
I hope he says something along the lines of, like, I've heard other people say this about people, and I think it's very nice. So I hope he says that, like, I'm brilliant and interesting and compassionate and nice. And not because I'm brilliant and smarts, but like in the way that I like see the world and people. And I hope he thinks I'm charming. I also don't want to praise mama's boy that every other partner that he might have is like great.
Oh, me too
But
late on that one for the audience. He recently, when I was with him, said in the car, um, Amber had said, I'm going to shout from the rooftops how much I love you. And he said, no, mama, please don't do that. And she's like, why? I want to tell everybody how much I love you. And he said, but if you do that, then they're going to love me. And they're probably going to love me more than you. And I don't want anybody to love me more than you. And I am in the front seat, a puddle of tears. Like, oh my gosh. And I don't know if you guys watch Silent Live. There's a skit where they're like, Tommy, did you get that? I got it. I got it. Camera. I got the recording of it because it was just such a sweet little moment about like his fear of his mom just not being the one who loves him the most. So you might be too late, but I appreciate the effort. So Natalie, what would you want your child, or how would you want your child to describe you?
That I move through the world with love for not only others, but for myself.
I love the last part. I love that last part. It's such a hard thing for so many women to do. And so that's cool. It's a continual thing. I loved the conversation. I loved your ability to come in here and share both personal and professional uh and have it be about conversation, grace, and acceptance instead of blame and ire and anger, which I think so often happens in subject matters like this. So I want to say thank you and I appreciate it. I love you both for doing this, even though Natalie, I've never met you in person. But I really do appreciate the discussion and making it easier for me to have dialogue about these things and work out my own therapy with somewhat willing participants. So thank you very much.